Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. So I am Chester Ribeiro from IIT Madras, and in this short QEEE course, we will be looking into something known as public key cryptography. Okay, so this of course forms a part of cryptography, and in particular, or more broadly, it is a part of security. Okay, so first of all, before we actually dwell into deeper aspects into public key cryptography, we'll just have a brief introduction of why we require cryptography first and where does actually public key cryptography actually fall in this entire scheme. So as we know today that everything that we do, or we have a lot of dependence on the internet. For example, we know that a lot of our shopping is actually done online these days, and there's a lot of drive, especially in the last few years, to have more of e-commerce like activities, where trading is done more online rather than go to a regular shop or do a standard trade with the normal paper type of currency. So besides that, we use a lot of internet to actually store various things. We publish a lot of our data online through websites like Facebook or Google or things like that. And of course, there is a big issue of privacy. So over here, we are actually afraid, for example, if we do a e-commerce or we actually buy something through Amazon, we are actually afraid that our bank password or our credit card number should not be leaked to some third party. And the only way or the scheme that is actually currently used to prevent such fraud occurring is cryptography. And in particular, a lot of this actually depends on public key cryptography. For that matter, a lot of things that we actually do online today is secured with cryptography, and a lot of this cryptography is actually with this public key schemes, such as the schemes such as the RSA, which we will be studying in detail during this course, and other public key cryptography schemes like Diffie-Hellman and elliptic curve cryptography, which is also used widely to actually protect various transactions which are done online. So broadly speaking, before we actually dwell into what cryptography is actually useful for, let us first look at some of the fundamental requirements of where cryptography actually fits in our day-to-day life, especially when we actually look at online activities. Okay, so one of the most important uses of cryptography is to obtain something known as confidentiality. And what do you mean by this is that suppose we have a particular document or a particular letter or maybe a photograph or an image or maybe some digital data, and you want to ensure that this digital data is only viewed by people who are authorized to view it. For instance, you would want that this data that you're actually actually having, for example, a picture of some picture or some data file, is only viewed to, say, your family and friends. So cryptography would essentially help you to achieve this by something known as a secret key. As long as people who have the secret key, or rather who own the secret key, so if a person owns the secret key, they would be able to actually view this data. And any third party or any other person who is not your close family and friends, if he tries to actually look at this picture or this data file which you have actually encrypted with cryptography, he will not be able to do so because he does not have the secret key. So one of the fundamental uses of cryptography is to achieve confidentiality, especially for communication, online communication. Another big advantage of cryptography, or where cryptography is actually being used, is for data integrity. Okay, So what do we mean by this? So it means that if I actually have a particular, maybe say, let us say a file, or I have written a particular book, or maybe some particular article, I want to be ensured that that only I can actually make modifications to that particular article or that particular document which I have created. It should not be the case that I actually send this particular document online, maybe through my Gmail or any other email service, and in between somebody actually taps into this document, modifies something in such a way, and then in some, maybe in a so that the document actually means something totally different, and then actually sends this particular document to its current destination. So in other words, I do not, whenever I create a document, I want to ensure that that document is not tampered by anybody else on its route, or when it is actually publicized. Or other words, I should be the only one who can make modifications to that document. So this is actually known as data integrity, and it is what is actually used in cryptography. This is also one particular application of cryptography to ensure that documents are not modified unless unless it is a person is authorized to actually make those modifications. A nice example would be, let's say, a bank check that you have written, where you, let us say, you actually want to give 1,000 rupees to somebody, but when you actually send this check, let's assume that somebody actually makes this change from 1,000 rupees to say 10,000 rupees, right? So we want to actually prevent such alterations of the document, and that is where cryptography will play a key role. So of course, when we are actually talking about cryptography, we do not mean like paper checks which we write in the bank, but rather we are actually talking about transactions online in other things, like for example your email service. You log into, you open your web browser, you say www.gmail.com. The first thing that it's going to ask you is to enter your username and password. So this will ensure that only if you have the authority, or if you are authenticated with your password, only then you have access to the Gmail service and to be able to read that particular email or any other things that is with respect to that particular account. So a person who does not have this particular password, of course, will not get access to your Gmail account. So cryptography, of course, plays a lot of there's a lot of role of cryptography in actually ensuring that the passwords are indeed kept safe, and that it is difficult for some third person to be able to guess your password or bypass this password and get access to your data. A fourth and important use of cryptography is for non-repudiation. So what do you mean by this? So let us consider a particular case where you have two people, and one person has actually sent a message to the other person, and after a few days or a few weeks, this person is actually claims that he has not said such a thing, or he has actually said something which is totally different. So this is what we do not want to happen. So if this particular sender has made a particular statement, then it should be the fact that even after 1 year or 10 years or even 100 years, it should be the case that she cannot change the statement what she has made at the particular point in time. So this is what we call as non-repudiation, where a person will not be able to claim that she did not send a particular message or did not state something to the other person. And again here, we use a lot of cryptography. For example, a nice example of this is, let us say that you have actually sent 100 rupees to some person, and after 5 or 6 days you actually state that you have not sent 100 rupees but you have actually sent 1000 rupees, right? So this means that you if you have not used any cryptography, it would be difficult for people to actually identify whether you're telling the truth now or telling telling a lie. So if cryptography was used, then such things will not happen. If you have sent 100 rupees at a particular point in time, then at a later point you cannot actually take this back, or you cannot actually change this to something else. Okay, so let's look a little more detail into the scheme for confidentiality. So recollect that confidentiality was the first thing that was one of the most important applications of cryptography. That is, we have a particular document which is called confidential, and we want to ensure that unless people have a particular secret key or a secret password, only then will this document be readable to them. So a third person who does not have this particular secret key or secret password should not be able to actually have any meaning of this particular document. So let's look at the generic scheme for confidentiality. So let's say we have these two people, Alice and Bob, and they are separated maybe at two different places. One is in India, one is in maybe Chennai, the other one maybe in Delhi. And Alice wants to send a message to Bob, and let's say the message is called attack at dawn. So the only way she could send it is, let us say, through an untrusted communication link like the internet. So what we mean by this untrusted communication link is that this link is probably shared by multiple people, very similar to the internet that we're using today, and therefore other people could actually snoop on this particular link and gain information about what is being sent. Now suppose Alice wants to send the message in such a way that only Bob is able to actually read that particular message. So in this particular case, Alice is sending the message attack at dawn, and she wants that only Bob should be able to read this attack at dawn, and some third party like Mallory, an attacker over here, who is able to snoop into this untrusted channel. For example, he's snooping on some network line between Alice and Bob. So Mallory should not be able to get this or decode or find out what the message has been sent between Alice to Bob. So in order to achieve this particular scheme, what is widely used these days is an encryption algorithm. So what is typically done is that we have an encryption algorithm over here. This is this box in this particular case, and it takes two inputs. One is the message that Alice wants to encrypt, and the other one is a secret key, which is shown over here as K. Now this secret key is in such a way that only Alice and Bob have knowledge about the secret key, and Mallory does not have any information about the secret key. Now the inputs to the encryption algorithm is Alice's message, attack at dawn, and the secret key. And what the encryption algorithm would do is it would create something called a ciphertext, which looks like totally random or totally like a totally random data. So if you actually look at the ciphertext over here, as just as this particular example, it shows that it seems to have no relationship between the original message that Alice had sent. So as a result, if Mallory has to snoop on this particular communication link, Mallory will only be able to get this ciphertext and would not be able to actually decipher or find out what was the original message. On the other hand, Bob, who actually has knowledge about the secret key which was used during the encryption, would pass this ciphertext through something known as a decryption algorithm, shown as D over here, and the resultant of the decryption algorithm is the original message attack at dawn, which Alice had sent. Now provided that now this attack at dawn, or rather the original message Alice had sent, would be correctly decrypted if and only if the key correctly matches with that of the encryption key. So for instance, if Bob had, let us say, some other key, K prime, then it would be extremely difficult or almost impossible for him to use K prime, get the ciphertext and decrypt the correct message. So most likely what would be the case is that if Bob has the wrong secret key, the ciphertext would decode or decrypt to something which again looks totally different from what Alice had sent. So just to summarize, we have this encryption algorithm which takes the message which Alice wants to encrypt and a secret key and creates a ciphertext. Now the ciphertext is a totally random string which does not seem to contain any information about the original message from Alice, and this ciphertext can be safely sent over an untrusted communication link like the internet. On the other side, Bob, who has knowledge about the secret key K, would pass the ciphertext through the decryptor to get back the original message that Alice had sent. And any third party or any attacker or any other person who does not have the knowledge of the secret K will only see the ciphertext, which looks totally random, and would gain no information about what Alice had sent. We had a one particular assumption here. The assumption was that Alice as well as Bob have somehow agreed upon a secret key to be actually used in their communication. Well, the one way this could be possible is that this Alice and Bob meet at one particular place and they decide upon what key they should use for encryption and decryption. And then later on, Alice comes to Chennai, Bob goes to Delhi, and then they start to encrypt and decrypt with that. But you see that this is not always possible. Alice and Bob may be totally different people, and it's not always possible for them to meet together and decide upon what secret key to be used. So we have a basic problem over here, right? So the problem is that we somehow need Alice and Bob to figure out one common secret key between them. So typically what is used is some trusted communication link, for example, or you could also think of it's a different communication link, such as a courier or a postal letter, where Alice and Bob could then agree upon a secret key. But of course, this also does not actually guarantee secrecy, based on the fact that somebody could actually snoop or tap into this courier message sent bit from Alice to Bob or vice versa and determine what the secret key is. Other techniques that have been used is known as code books, where Alice and Bob previously would have decided upon a particular book which contains a lot of secret keys, and both of them have these books on each of their sites, and the assumption is that Mallory does not have this secret book which is there. So Alice would then say, would tell Bob like, hey, I'm using the secret from this page number 45 of this code book. So Bob has the code book, so he goes to page number 45, and there would be a secret key over there, and that would be used. So Mallory, who does not have the code book, will get no information about the secret key, will the original message that Alice had sent, that is the attack at dawn. So you see the big advantage over here, that we do not need to have a secret key exchange between Alice and Bob. There are no code books involved. There is no postal or any courier involved between Alice and Bob. So Bob would just create a public key and private key, keep the private key secret, and public key he would advertise to everyone. While Alice, on the other hand, if she wants to encrypt something and send it to Bob, she will go to his website, get the public key, take the message, pass it through the encryption algorithm with the public key, and get the corresponding ciphertext. Now, this ciphertext can be only decrypted by Bob, who has the corresponding private key, right? Mallory or any other third person who does not have the secret or private key will not be able to decrypt the message. Okay, so yeah, so let us see. So obviously there is something very special about these encryption algorithms. So if you want to if you actually compare it with the previous scheme that we had seen over here, this seems quite doable because the key is actually shared between these two. But on the other hand, if you look at public key algorithms, we are actually doing an encryption key which is in fact a public information, and there is nothing secret about that, and this is what makes it very different from the previous schemes that we have actually looked at. So before we go into details about how this public key algorithm actually works, we will just take a small example, which does not involve any mathematics of something, and we may be actually doing this, we may have actually done this in our day-to-day life. Public key algorithms makes use of something known as one-way function. So a one-way function is a function which is easy to compute in one direction, but it's difficult to actually inverse. To give you an example of what a one-way function is, you could actually think of this particular lock. So this is the press lock. I'm sure like many of us have seen these locks, where in order to actually lock or lock this particular lock, all you have to do is just press this thing inside or put this inside the hole and press it, and then it becomes locked. So you see that this is easy to compute. You just need to press the lock and it will lock, and it can be done quite easily. Now once you have actually locked, you do not have the key, for example, then it is extremely difficult to actually open the lock. So for example, going from the open state to the lock state is easy. On the other hand, without the key, going from the lock state back to the open state is extremely difficult, right? And this is, let us say, a real life example of a one-way function, which most of us have seen in our day-to-day life, or most of us are using in our day-to-day life. Okay, right? Now what public key algorithms use is, of course, not a lock like this, but not a physical lock like this, but actually a mathematical function which behaves like this lock. So this mathematical function, it would be easy to invoke it in one direction and get the correct result. So that is equivalent to locking it. And however, on the other hand, once you have actually got the output of this mathematical function, it is actually difficult to invert it. That is, to get what the original message was, or original input was. Okay, so just to give you an example of this, let us say we have this function y equal to f of x. Okay, so this function is said to be a one-way function, OWF, if computing f of x is easy to compute, but computing from y obtaining x is difficult. Said another way, it would be easy to determine the value of y given x, so this is easy to compute. On the other hand, doing the inverse operation, that is giving from y obtaining the inverse, the x, is difficult. So computing this is easy, while computing this, the inverse is difficult. Okay, so what public key algorithms actually use is a variant of this one-way functions known as trapdoor one-way functions. Here, just to give you a simple example with the same lock which we have seen previously. In addition to the lock, we have the key for the lock, which is known as the trapdoor. So now you see that given this particular lock, it is easy to actually lock it just by pressing it, and once it is locked, as before, it is very difficult to open it. However, if a person has the key for the lock, which we call the trap door, then it would be easy for the person to actually open the lock. So you see that there is a small trap door which is involved over here. If a person has the trap door, it would be easy for him to actually invert the function, or rather open the lock. On the other hand, if he does not have this particular key, or he does not have this particular trap door, and he just has this locked thing, then it is very difficult for him to actually break or open the lock, right? So if we go back to our thing, a trapdoor one-way function, you could represent it as y equal to f of the trapdoor, we'll call it as a k with x. Computing this is easy. However, computing the inverse without the key, so computing x equal to f inverse y without the key over here, k, let us say k equal to k prime. So if k is not equal to k prime, so this is difficult. Computing the inverse x given f inverse y with the correct key k, correct, while this is the wrong key k, this is easy. We have the right trapdoor. If we have the right trapdoor. So given this, let us see how this trapdoor one-way function would be used in a public key algorithm. So Alice, as usual, wants to send a message to Bob. So let us say this Bob sends a lot of these locks in these open states to many people whoever wants to actually communicate with him. And Alice takes one of these locks, she buys a very strong box, puts a message in the box and locks it. Now once it is locked, she herself cannot open it because she does not have the corresponding key for this lock. Similarly, any other attacker or malware or any third person who does not have the key will not be able to open this lock and therefore cannot read the message. On the other hand, when Bob gets this particular box, the lock box, he has the corresponding key for this lock, so he can open it and read the message. So this is how, in a very broad sense, or in a very non-mathematical sense, is what public key cryptography actually does. So in real life, or rather in the actual cryptographic algorithms, we of course do not have physical locks like this, but as we see in the other example, we have these one-way mathematical functions. So there are several mathematical functions which people have tried out for public key cryptographic algorithms, but the most common, or rather the two most common ones, are one is based on the integer factorization, while the other is known as the discrete log problem. So the integer factorization problem is actually stated like this. Suppose we have two primes p and q, and it is very easy to actually compute the product of these two primes. So you just you just multiply these two numbers, these two primes p and q, you will get the product. So it is easy to compute n, which is the product of p into q. On the other hand, given n, it is very difficult to factorize n into their products p and q, right? So given n, it is very difficult to find out what the factors of n were. That is, this is the difficult part, while computing n from p and q is easy. So this feature, or this scheme, this is a NP, it's maybe an NP complete problem, and it is used in crypto systems like RSA. So we will be looking a lot in this particular course about RSA and how people could actually encrypt data with RSA, and also the possible attacks on RSA, and also the implementation aspects on the RSA cryptographic cipher. The other very common or very popular trapdoor mathematical one-way function is based on the discrete log problem. So it is based on the fact that if we have two elements of something known as a finite group, but let's just call it as two elements b and g, it is easy to compute b to the power of k it's very easy to compute b to the power of k. Let's say this is equal to g for some k. So in other words, if you're given this some element b and some number k, it is quite easy to compute b to the power of k to give you another element called g, right? Given b and k, it is easy to compute g. While on the other hand, if you're just given b and you're given g, it is very difficult to find out what the exponent k was. So this is uh, the inverse of the problem, which is given b and g, it is very difficult to determine what k is, right? So this discrete log problem is used in crypto systems like Diffie-Hellman, and a variant of this problem known as the elliptic curve discrete log problem, or ECDLP, is very popular in elliptic curve cryptographic systems, right? So we if time permits, we'll go into more detail about the discrete log problem during this course, but for now we will just actually just define only the basic or the important aspects of this particular problem. But we will be looking quite in detail about the integer factorization problem. So what are the applications of public key cryptography? We have also already seen one application, that is for to obtain confidentiality. We had seen the encryption scheme where Alice takes Bob's public key and encrypts the message with his public key, and Bob will be able to decrypt it because he has the corresponding private key. Another very common use of public key cryptography is in what is known as digital signatures. So digital signatures, like a signature as we know, is something which people can use to actually identify or to actually state that you have actually signed this particular document, and you could actually claim that to be the authority who has created this particular document. So the digital signature is the digital equivalent of the signature that you typically sign with your pen on a paper. And what it actually means is, or the message it actually gives, is that if somebody like Alice has actually signed say a document with her digital signature, it would mean that Alice is the sole creator of this document, and because she has digitally signed that document, so it is quite certain that nobody else has actually tampered with that document, or rather it can be easily verified that no third party has actually tampered with the document, provided the third party has not stolen Alice's private key. So how this scheme actually works is as follows, very broadly. So let us say Alice has created this document with the text "Hello Bob," right? So she passes this particular document through something known as a hash function, which we'll be seeing more in detail in the next class. And the output of this hash function is a particular signature or a particular string, which is totally dependent on the message that Alice had created. Even if you change one alphabet or one bit in this particular message, the hash value will look totally different. So said another way, this hash value over here would uniquely or identify the message that Alice had created. So once you have obtained the hash, Alice would encrypt the hash with her secret key, right? So the hash value which is obtained is encrypted with Alice's secret key to obtain what is known as her digital signature for the message "Hello Bob." So this message is sent over the internet, or it could be actually passed to anyone. And the important thing which I want to point out here is that we are not very keen to make this message as a private message between Alice and Bob, and therefore anyone on the internet could actually read this message from Alice. But on the other hand, we want to make sure that no third person is able to actually modify this message to something else. Instead, for example, we don't want some third person who actually snoops into this particular communication link to be able to actually take this message and change it from "Hello Bob" to "Goodbye Bob," and so this is something we don't want to happen. That is, we don't want the message to be tampered and changed with. So how do we actually verify that the message has not been tampered? We Bob, who is on the other side, would take the signature, decrypt it with Alice's public key, which is the corresponding public key corresponding to Alice's secret key, to get the hash function over here. So she has actually Bob has actually inverted this function over here to get this value. So this is supposedly the hashed value which was the output of this point, because he has actually inverted it with the Alice's public key. And he would also take the message and compute the hash function, hashed value, based on the same way that Alice has actually created the hashed value. So now he just needs to check whether the hashed value created from the message and the hashed value decrypted from Alice's public key are exactly the same. If they are same, then he knows that the message has originated from Alice and nobody has actually tampered with that particular message. These two hashed values actually differ. Then Bob knows that the message has been tampered with and modified somewhere during the communication link. Okay, so I will actually take, so there is one more application of public key cryptography, and that is for key establishment. Okay, so we said so many good points about public key cryptography so far, right? We said that for example, to start over here, we said that there are no code books or no trusted communication links that is required, and people could just take public keys and encrypt it, and therefore the ciphertext once encrypted can only be decrypted by the corresponding plain text. So what is the need to have such schemes like this way? So what is the need to have schemes like this, which are typically known as symmetric key ciphers or block ciphers? So why do we need to have block ciphers present at all? We can just transfer all our encryption to make use of schemes like RSA, which is a public key algorithm, and we don't need to actually be able to use any block cipher like AES or DES or any symmetric key cipher of that matter. So the thing to actually note over here, and the big limitation of public key algorithms, is the fact that these public key algorithms which are used to actually do encryptions, decryptions of or digital signatures and so on are extremely computationally intensive. So what I mean by that is that to actually do an encryption or a decryption with a public key cryptographic algorithm, considerably long time compared to doing it with, let's say, a symmetric key cipher like AES or DES. So just to give you a notion about how long it takes, in our lab we had a wireless sensor node, which is typically a 16-bit processor, and we wanted to do an RSA encryption on that. And to do just a single encryption, the RSA public key cryptographic algorithm, it took 30 minutes. So the 30 minutes corresponding to one encryption of a ciphertext. So one ciphertext was created every 30 minutes. So you see the overhead is immense with public key algorithms. And therefore, even though it has a lot of benefits, there are also some limitations with public key algorithms, mostly because of it's very computationally intensive, and it takes a lot of time to actually do an encryption or a decryption. And also on the other hand, if you're actually looking at public key algorithms, let's say on very small devices like your mobile phone and so on, the amount of power it actually consumes is quite large. So just to take an example again, suppose I have an RFID, that is a radio frequency identifier. Again, to do just one public key encryption on an RFID will completely drain out the entire power of that RFID. So every time you do an encryption, you may have to recharge your RFID or throw it away or fit a new battery. Therefore, what people actually do in practice is they combine symmetric key algorithms with public key algorithms. Initially, the public key algorithms is used to actually create this trusted link between the two parties, in this case Alice and Bob, and the public key algorithm is going to be used to ensure that both Alice and Bob agree upon a certain secret key which is common between both of them. And once this thing has been established, from that time onwards, the old-fashioned symmetric key cryptographic systems would be used to encrypt data with between Alice and Bob. Okay, so just to give you an example, okay, so we have Alice and Bob, and somehow they need to actually, they want to encrypt data um, messages, and Alice wants to send it to Bob, who would decrypt the decrypt the ciphertext to get back the original message, but they do not want to use a public key algorithm because like I mentioned, it is very computationally intensive. So they want to actually somehow be able to establish a common key k between the two of them. So what they do, they actually make use of public key cryptography for this particular scheme. So this application of public key cryptography is known as key establishment. Okay, so the key establishment is a protocol between Alice and Bob, so that both of them agree upon a secret key k without using any trusted communication link or any code book or anything of that sort. So just public key algorithms will be used. So let us actually take a particular example of the Diffie-Hellman uh, key key exchange protocol. So just to recollect, with Diffie-Hellman, we had some element, let us say G, and so G is the G is typically known as the generator, and it is public information. We also have an element called A, which is the secret element, or we call it as a secret key, and we have capital A equal to G to power of A, um, which is the public key. Okay, so there is also a mod P here, but let's just ignore it for the time being. So what the Diffie-Hellman one-way function states is that given A and G, it is easy to compute capital A. However, given capital A and G, it is difficult to determine what small a was, the exponent was. Okay, so let us actually take this as our thing, and let us see how Alice and Bob could actually exchange keys between them by using the Diffie-Hellman key exchange protocol. So so one thing which is global to everyone is this generator G. So what Alice would do is select some A, which is her secret key, and compute capital A equal to G power A mod P, which I will leave right now, which is the public key. And at the same time, Bob, just call this is Alice and this is Bob. So Bob would select another element called B, which is Bob's secret key. This is Alice's secret key, and compute B equal to G power B, and B, this capital B is his public key. So Bob would send this B to Alice, and Alice would send capital A to Bob. So the public keys things are exchanged, and what Alice is going to do is she is going to take B and raise it to the power of something known as, let's call it as K. And this side, Alice is going to take, Bob is going to take this capital A which is obtained and raise it to the power of B, his private key, and we will now show that this capital A to the power of B is equal to capital B to the power of A, which is equal to K. So in order to see this, first of all, substitute B as G to the power of B to the power of A, which is equal to G to the power of BA, which is equal to G to the power of AB. And here capital A is nothing but G to the power of A from here to power of B, which is again equal to G to the power of AB. So you see that both Alice and Bob have both been able to compute the same value, G to the power of AB in one case and also G to the power of AB in Bob's case, and therefore they have been able to exchange or create some common thing between the two of them, which they could be then used to actually communicate with each other and create in a secure manner using a symmetric key block cipher. Okay, so this was a small example of the Diffie-Hellman key exchange protocol of how public keys can be used. Now, one thing to also just realize is that if you have an attacker, let's say Mallory, he knows small g because g is a public information. He is also able to determine what capital A was, and he also knows what capital B was. But because of the Diffie-Hellman key exchange protocol, or the difficulty of the Diffie-Hellman problem, it's difficult to actually compute what what A and B were, and therefore it's almost impossible for Mallory or any other attacker to compute K equal to G power AB. Therefore, the secret key K, which is established between Alice and Bob, is secure between the two of them, and then they could actually use it to do encryptions. So for this particular course, so what we are actually going to do in this course is going to look at these various schemes and the mathematical backgrounds required to understand these schemes. And the plan is that we will look at number theory today. Essentially, we will build the required mathematics that is required to actually understand especially the RSA cryptographic algorithm and the various attacks on the RSA algorithm. And then we will look in the next class, we will actually look in the RSA protocol. We look at the implementation aspects, something known as primality testing, and the various attacks on the RSA crypto system. Then we will also look at hash functions, digital signatures, and if time permits, we will go into more detail about Diffie-Hellman and the elliptic curve cryptography. We will start now. So these are some reference books. So especially I will be using the first reference, that is it's a book by Douglas Stinson known as Cryptographic Theory and Practice, 3rd edition. So I think there is an Indian edition which is available, and it's a very good book for this particular thing. So we'll go into the number theory parts now. So if you have any questions, you could post it now, or you could okay. There's a question from IGCE PJB Talvinder. What are RSA digital signatures? So so we had mentioned what digital signatures were. So essentially these are some schemes by just like our normal signatures where we actually sign on paper. A digital signature is something where we can actually sign on a digital document like a file or a photograph or a certificate, and it will prove that if you actually digitally sign a certificate, it would mean that this certificate or this document has been originated by you and it has not been tampered by anybody else. So if we go back to this particular slide, this one, so we see that there are two things which are involved in the creating a digital signature, which is over here. One is a hash function, and then there is an encryption with the secret key of Alice. So if this particular encryption is done with the RSA encryption scheme, then the signature is known as a RSA digital signature. And therefore, in order to actually verify the signature, you would require the RSA decryption algorithm along with Alice's public key and also the corresponding hash function, in order to verify whether the signature is correct or wrong. So a question from DCRU, Parvinder, whether symmetric key and asymmetric key is popular in real world. So as I mentioned during the class, during the lecture, so both have their own use. While asymmetric key or public key cryptographic systems have a lot of advantages, like I mentioned, that you don't need a trusted channel to exchange keys and so on. The big drawback with asymmetric key algorithms is that it is extremely time consuming to do a single encryption. Symmetric key algorithms, the main limitation, as is obvious, is that we need a trusted environment between the Alice and Bob, and therefore um, if you're able to achieve the trusted environment, symmetric key algorithms will be far beneficial, because the amount of time taken to compute or do an encryption or a decryption is far much lesser compared to do an encryption with a public key cipher. What is the best technique for authentication of data? Okay, so essentially, if you want to authenticate data, so the suggestion would be to actually use a good encryption algorithm, which is established worldwide as, and it has a is accepted to be a good encryption algorithm. Along with that, you need to actually use a key, a secret key, which is of considerably large size, so that an attacker or any third person will find it very difficult to actually guess what the secret key was. So each encryption algorithm has its own advantage and disadvantage techniques. For example, we have seen RSA and ECC as very common algorithms which are used, while ECC is becoming more popular just because the size of the key that is required for ECC is almost 5 times or 4 to 5 times smaller than that of an RSA key, and it will still give you the same amount of security. So ECC is typically preferred, or that's the direction we are actually going. So what is the so this is a question from GECL. So what is the difference between authentication and authorization? So authentication, for example, could be I am authenticated to actually use a particular computer, for example, or whenever you want to log into your Gmail ID, you have to enter your username and password, and therefore you are authenticated to actually use your Gmail account. On the other hand, authorization means you're authorized to actually modify a particular document, or you have the authority to create a particular email and so on. So you see that authentication is kind of like lets you inside a particular house or a particular portal or a particular email account and so on. So that is authentication. While authorization is, on the other hand, you have is the power you have, or the privileges that you have to actually create a particular document or a particular email and so on. So to take an example, maybe the Prime Minister of a country is authorized to actually make certain laws, make certain documents, while, as I mentioned, authentication means like authenticated to actually use a particular equipment or a particular feature of a particular machine or a particular website or so on. Okay, in terms of cryptography, what are the main security goals? I'm not understanding what the question is over here, so I think you should be more. So there's another thing about another question about from IGCEJB. So what is the difference between encoding and encryption? So of course the two things are totally different, they are wide apart. So encoding is used to actually arrange data in a particular format so that it can be transferred over the internet or over a medium in a efficient manner. For example, you could decide to encode data, add error correcting codes to ensure that no errors or errors could be detected and corrected, or you could actually compress data so that you don't take too much of bandwidth in your communication link. So all this is part of encoding. On the other hand, the application of encryption is totally different, where you actually want to hide information that is sent through a medium. It's okay for people to actually rather here the main focus is that you want to prevent unauthorized people to not to view or not to have access to that particular information. Another question from Mohanjit from GECL. How can we send a message through untrusted communication link? So this is again with the help of encryption, like we have mentioned in the slides during the lecture. So how can public key DGI Gargi? So how can public key be exchanged securely? So so this is the essential reason why we want public key cryptography, and as the name suggests, it's a public key, so you don't need to exchange it in a secure manner. So I could create my own public key and I could advertise it on my website, and there is no need for me to make this public have any security for this public key. So I could even, like for example, just print it in tomorrow's newspaper saying that this is my public key, and if you want to send me messages, you could encrypt with this particular key. On the other hand, what is important is that the corresponding secret key or the corresponding private key should be totally private and totally kept secret with me itself and nobody else. So why GCL Mohanjit, why can't we use two-way functions in public key cryptography? So I do not know what is a two-way function, so probably you should elaborate on that. Okay, how long will it take to compute the value of A? What A? So by A, I'm assuming that you actually mean this this A over here. So did you mean the small a or the capital A? So small a is just some random thing which you choose. It is just a secret element. So you don't have to compute anything. On the other hand, this capital A, the public key, is generated from this secret key, that is G. You take G, the generator, raise it to the power of small a to generate the public key. So the time would be mostly considered for generating this capital A, and the time would be equal to the log of, or the bit width or the size in bits for the secret key. So for example, the order, suppose at least the time taken will be proportional to the length of the secret key. DGI Gargi, is public key cryptography same as asymmetric key cryptography? Yeah, in a general sense, yes. People also use public key cryptography and asymmetric key cryptography in the same sense. So they could be considered as the same thing. So in the by a question by PECPY, in the trapdoor one-way function model, how is the key exchanged? So again, we don't need an exchange of the key, because in the model that we have actually shown, we just need to keep the private key secret, while the public key you just advertise. It can be actually public information, right? So we don't need to exchange anything as such. So what is the main difference between RSA and Diffie-Hellman? This is a question by GECL Mohanjit. So RSA is based on the integer factorization problem, while Diffie-Hellman is based on the discrete log problem, right? So the RSA, as I had mentioned during the lecture, is based on the fact that given a number n, it is difficult to actually factorize that numbers into its prime factors, while Diffie-Hellman on the other hand is based on something like this, where you have some generator and you have raised it to the power of some exponent a to get the public to get this capital A. Now it is easy to compute given this generator G and the small a, it is easy to compute the capital A. On the other hand, given the capital A and the generator G, it is difficult to actually compute the small a. So the basic mathematical framework or the mathematical tools used in both cases are very different. Another question from PEC PY, if A equal to G power A, can it be solved by using log on both sides when the value of elements is large? So that is actually precisely where it is difficult. If you take log, um, it's very difficult to actually compute, and that's our assumption. Okay, so theoretically cryptographic algorithms are good, but practically they fail. Why? Uh, so I don't understand the question like as follows, like theoretically cryptographic algorithms are good, but practically they fail. So yeah, this could be a very large thing. So I could not, I should not dwell into this thing right now, because there are other aspects due to which the algorithm may fail and may allow an attacker to actually decrypt information. On the other hand, the algorithms or cryptographic algorithms come with a lot of mathematical rigor and a lot of proofs of security. So it's not very easy to mathematically break these ciphers. So how does Diffie-Hellman key exchange avoid man-in-the-middle attack? So the notion which I have actually given is a very simple notion, and just to actually demonstrate the idea of key establishment. Uh, the actual key exchange will have other parameters which we will not actually consider right now in this introductory class. So if time permits, then we will actually look into that. So what is the size of A in bits? So if you're looking at this, the size of A is typically around 1024 bits, or more recently it should be at least 1024 or 1 kilobits. Okay, in Diffie-Hellman key is manage or data also. Um, so there's a question by GECL Mohanjit. In Diffie-Hellman, is only the key managed or data also? So like I mentioned, all public key algorithms could be used either for digital signatures, encryption, and for key establishment. So you could use it for any of these things. So encryption of course is used for data encryption, while key exchange is used for, so depending on your application you may choose any of these models or any of these uses of the thing. Okay, so I think we've answered most of the questions. Okay, so what we are actually going to look now is we are going to actually build the mathematical background. So like is quite obvious that, and what has been mentioned before, that these cryptographic algorithms uses a lot of mathematics, and um, uh, a lot of security is actually proven with very complicated mathematics. However, for this particular course, we are just going to go through the basic mathematical aspects that is required to understand the various cryptographic algorithms. In particular, we will just build the foundations so as to understand the RSA cryptographic algorithm. So this would also cover like many of the other cryptographic algorithms, but let us actually focus on the RSA right now. So the first thing we need to actually look at is uh, modular arithmetic. Okay, so we need to actually first look at division theorem. Um, so let me actually use it over here. So suppose we have a positive number, say n, and let us say we have an integer a. Then we know that we can divide, when we divide a divided by n, it will give us a quotient q and a remainder r, right? And therefore we can actually um, write it in the following, that we could write a is equal to uh, q into n plus r, right? So for example, if you take let us say uh, 18 divided by 3, or rather just for illustration let us say 18 divided by 5. So we will get a quotient equal to 3 and a remainder which is equal to 3 again. So 18 is equal to, quotient is 3 into 5 plus 3, 15 plus 3. Okay, so one thing we know about this particular remainder is that it has a value between 0 and n. So r lies between the range of 0 to less than n, and the value of q is the floor of the function a divided by n, right? Now let us take that we have um, two numbers. Let us say um, let's write it here. Let us say a and b, uh, a and b, and as usual we have this common modular common number n. So when we divide a divided by n, we get quotient and remainder as we have seen here. So we can actually write a equal to q, let us call it as q1 n plus r1, and b equal to q2 n, gives you another quotient n and a remainder r2. This occurs when b is divided by n. So one thing that is interesting for us is that when r1 is equal to r2, we say that a is congruent to b mod m, mod n. So let us take this particular example where we took a equal to 18, and when n equal to 5, so we got a remainder of 3, r equal to 3. So this is our r1 equal to 3. Now if we take b equal to let us say 13 and n equal to 5, divide 13 divided by 5 would leave a remainder again equal to 3. So we say that in this case, because the remainders are the same in both case, modulo 5, we say that 18 is congruent to 13 mod 5. So this is equivalent to saying that 18 is congruent to 3 mod 5. Why? Because when you take 3 and divide it by 5, it leaves a remainder 3. So what are the other things we can actually look at? So we've seen this, and so in a similar way we can also say like 13 is congruent to 3 mod 5 because of this, but we can also say that is congruent to minus 2 mod 5. Why can we say this? Is because we will see that 18 can be written as 4 into 5 minus, so 4 into 5 is 20 minus 2, right? So it leaves a remainder of minus 2. So all these are various statements that we can also or these are the various examples for modular operation. So this is the congruence. We write it as 3 lines over here, and it also means that we state it as 18 congruent to 13 mod 5, for example, and essentially means that when divided by 5, 18 and 13 leave the same remainder. So when divided by 5 in this case, 18 and 3 leave the same remainder. Similarly, 13 and 3 leave the same remainder. And in this case, 18 and minus 2 leave the same remainder. Now what happens in this case? Let us say 20 congruent to something mod 5. So the remainder left in such a case is 0, right? So it means that 20 perfectly divides is perfectly divided by 5, right? The remainder left is 0. In such a case, we say that 5 divides 20, right? The symbol that we use is as follows. We say that 5 divides 20. That means it when you take 20 and divide it by 5, it leaves a remainder of 0, as in this case. So here are some more examples. We are writing A congruent to B mod M over here. If A and B happen to leave the same remainder as leave the same remainder when divided by M. And some examples are 13 congruent to 3 mod 5. We have seen this. 7, when you divide 7 by 3, it leaves a remainder of 1. Then we have 23 and 12. So 23, when it's divided by 12, it leaves a remainder minus 1, minus 1. So that is, it leaves a remainder 11. So you can write 11 as minus 1 mod. And the last case, when you take 20 divided by 10, it leaves a remainder of 0. So we state this as 20 is congruent to 0 mod 10, or 10 divides 20. So we are writing this as saying that 20 congruent to 10, 20 is congruent to 0 mod 10, because when you divide 20, when you divide 20 by 10, it leaves a remainder 0. So this we represent it as 10 divides 20. So all of these statements over here mean the same thing. So A congruent to B mod M means that when you take A and divide it by M, it leaves the same remainder as when B is divided by M. Next, this is also equivalent to saying that A is equal to B plus Km. Okay, and also M divides A minus B. So let's actually look at this. Let's take the example of 18 congruent to 3 mod 5. So the first thing we are looking at is that this is our first statement, and what we are stating is that um, uh, because of this third statement over here, M divides A minus B. So we are stating that 5 divides 18 minus 3, which is equal to 15, and which is indeed right. 5 divides 15, right? So when you divide 15 by 5, it leaves a remainder 0. The other statement which we can say is A equal to B plus some Km. We can write 18, we can write this also as, so this is one way of writing it. The second way of writing it, writing the same statement is this. And the third way of writing is that we can say 18 equal to 3 plus something into 5. So what is the value of this over here? It is 3, right? So this is also equivalent to actually any of these two previous statements. Is of course the definition that when 18 is divided by 3, when 18 is divided by 5, it leaves the same remainder R as when 3 is divided by 5. So remainder of 18 divided by 5 is equal to 3 divided by 5. So these are four equivalent statements, and if you state any of these things, then the others are quite evident. So the others follow from that. Another thing to note is that these congruence operations, the ones over here, they follow these three, they form an equivalence relationship. So equivalence relationship means that these three properties are satisfied: reflexivity, transitivity, and symmetricity. So reflexivity means that if you take any integer a, it is congruent to itself modulo, we say reflexivity. reflexive, you take any A, it is always congruent to A mod M. If we write it in some other way, we can say that M divides A minus A equal to 0, or that is, this is because 0 divides M, M divides 0. Then we could also state that the fourth and the third are quite obvious. So the next thing is symmetric. If A is congruent to B mod M, it implies that B is congruent to A mod M. For example, if 18 is congruent to 3 mod M, that is equivalent to saying that 3 is congruent to 18 mod M, and you can easily verify it. The last one is transitivity. Okay, so if A is congruent to B mod M and B is congruent to C mod M, then A is congruent to C mod M. Okay, and you can verify this easily. Just for example, you could take, say that 18 is congruent to 3 mod M, because we have mod 5, for example, where we take M equal to 5, and we also know that 13 is congruent to 3 mod 5. So this implies that 18 is rather this 18 is congruent to 13 mod 5. Okay, so we'll leave this. And there are some very simple arithmetic operations that you could actually do with these mod or with these congruences. So we will look at this. So we've also already seen reflexivity. These are some things which are actually followed, symmetric and transitivity of congruences. But we could also see that some other laws are also followed. That is, if A is congruent to B mod M and C is congruent to D mod M, then 1 minus A is congruent to minus B mod M, 2 A plus C is congruent to B plus C plus D mod M, and 3 you can actually multiply these over here. So in this particular case, we are just adding these relationships. So A plus C is congruent to B plus D mod M, and now we can also multiply these things as follows. So you can state that A into C is congruent to B into D mod. Okay, so these are two examples to solve. So let's for practice, let us just do one example to state. So about these three things you can actually verify, and I think that you should actually go back home and fit in various types of things, or like various values of A, B, C and D and M, and see that in fact this is actually working. And we could also try to solve problems of this nature. So we will try this one of these, that is let's try the first one. So prove that 2 power 32 plus 1 is divisible by 641. So what we mean by this is that when you divide 2 power 32 plus 1 divided by 641, the remainder is 0. Or we can actually write something like we want to prove that 641 divides 2 power 32 plus 1. So this is equivalent to saying 2 power 32 plus 1 is congruent to 0 mod 641. So let us see how we will prove this. So first of all, so I have done the calculations here, so I'm not, so I've just used simple calculator, so I'll just reproduce the results. So let us take 2 power 10. Okay, so 2 power 10 is 1024. 1024. And if you do 1024 modulo 641, you could actually take 1024 divided by 641 and get the remainder. So you'll see that this is congruent to 383. Okay, so now you take 2 power 10 into 2 power 10 is 2 power 20. So this is 3, this is congruent to, so rather 2 power 20 is congruent to 383 into 383 mod 641, and this you can actually find out to be 541 mod 641. So 2 power 20 is congruent to 541 mod 641. Now let's see how do you compute 2 power 30. So 2 power 30 would be written as 2 power 20 into 2 power 10, right? We know that 2 power 10 is 383 and 2 power 20 is 541 mod 641. So this is congruent to 541 into 383 mod 641. So you can go back and actually verify all of these numbers with a calculator, and what you'll see that if you multiply these two and take the remainder when divided by 641, you will get this to be equal to 160. So now let's see 2 power 32. So 2 power 32 is equal to 2 power 30 into 2 squared, that's 4, right? So this is congruent to 160 into 4, that is 640 mod, mod 641. 640 mod 641. So we got 2 power 32 is congruent to 640 mod 641. We can add 1 on both sides to get 2 power 32 plus 1, 2 power 32, sorry, both sides to get 2 power 32 plus 1 is congruent to 641 mod 641. I notice that 641 mod 641 is 0, because when you divide 641 by 641 you will get a remainder of 0. So therefore this is 0 mod 641. So we get that 641 divides 2 power 32 plus 1, and we are done. So in a similar way you could actually prove the second thing, that is prove that if you have a number, then the sum of the digits is divisible by 9. Then the number, if the sum of the digits of a number is divisible by 9, then the number itself is divisible by 9. Okay. The next thing we actually look at is GCD, or the greatest common divisor. So the GCD of two numbers is defined as the following. So or two integers. So the GCD is the largest positive integer that divides both numbers without leaving a remainder. For example, so we're looking at GCD For example, GCD of 8 and 12 is 4. So note that 4 divides 8, that is when you divide 8 by 4, it leaves a remainder 0, and also 4 divides 12, and also there is no number larger than 4 that divides both 8 and 12 simultaneously. Similarly, you could see that GCD of 24 and 18 is 6, which would indicate that 6 divides 24 and 6 divides 18, and you cannot find another integer greater than 6 which divides 24 and 18 simultaneously. What about this GCD of 5 and 8? Okay, so this is equal to 1. So because 1 is the smallest number that divides both 5 and 8, and we call this numbers 5 and 8 as co-prime. Therefore, in general, if if GCD of A comma B is equal to 1 and A is greater than equal to 1 and B is greater than equal to 2, then A and B are said to be co-prime or relatively prime. Okay, so next thing we look at is the Euler-Tauschent function. So let's define it again. So we call this the we define something known as the Euler Tauschent function, and it's represented as phi of n, and it counts the number of the number of integers that is less than or equal to n, that is also relatively prime to n. Okay, so phi of n counts the number of integers which is less than n and also relatively prime to n. For example, let's just take phi of 1 is equal to 2. Sorry, phi of 1 is 1, and what are the and what is phi of 9? Okay, so let us look at all the numbers that are relatively prime to 9. So we can the numbers which are relatively prime to 9 is 1, 2, 3 is not there, 4, 5, 6 is not there because it has a GCD which is greater than 1. GCD of 6 and 9 is greater than 1. 7 has a GCD of 1 with respect to 9 and 8. So the numbers which are not there is 3 and 6. That is because GCD of 3 comma 9 is not equal to 1, and also GCD of 6 comma 9 is not equal to 1. So you see that there are 6 numbers here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Therefore phi of 9 is equal to 6. Similarly, let's take another example of say phi of 26. Okay, and if you count the numbers which are relatively prime to 26, you will get 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11 and so on till 25. In fact, you will get all the odd numbers except 13. So there are thus phi of 26 has a value of 12. The good thing about this is that if you have some number n and n is equal to some, let's say m1 into m2, then phi of n will be equal to phi of m1 into phi of m2. So let us see if this holds within the above example. We have taken n equal to 26 and which is equal to 13 and 2, 13 into 2, right? Now if you actually count, phi of 13 will be equal to 12 and phi of 2 will be equal to 1. So phi of 13 is equal to 12 into 1 is equal to 12. Okay, there are more properties of this particular Euler-Toscan function phi of n. So um, if especially when it's the properties hold when n happens to be a prime, let us say p, let's say p is a prime, then phi of p will be equal to p minus 1. Okay, so this you can actually see examples over here. We have 35 of 13, 13 is a prime, so it will be 12 and it will contain all and the numbers which are relatively prime to 13 are all the numbers 1, 2, 3 to 12, right? So that 12 numbers. In fact, every number, it's 13 is a prime because every number less than 13 is cannot divide 13 without leaving a zero remainder. Okay, so this way we could actually look at more examples, more properties. So one property we've seen is that is this phi of n is phi of m1 into phi of m2, where n equal to m1 into m2. The second one, if p happens to be a prime, then phi of p is equal to p minus 1. 3, a phi of p power a is equal to p power a minus p to power of a minus 1. Okay, so let us not go into the proof of this, but you can easily verify that, for example, if p equal to 2 and a equal to 3, then phi of 2 cubed equal to phi of 8 equal to p cubed, p power a, that is 2 cubed minus 2 squared, that is 8 minus 4 is equal to 4. And indeed, let us just verify this. So the numbers relatively prime to 8 are 1, 3, 5 and 7. So indeed, the numbers, so these are the only numbers less than 8 which have a GCD with respect to 8 which is equal to, as 1. So these are the only numbers which are co-prime or relatively prime with 8, and we have found this using this particular formula. So let's try to simplify this. So we have like phi of p power a is equal to p power a minus p power a minus 1. So this is equal to, you can take the p power a common, so this becomes 1 minus 1 divided by p. Now we can combine this fact along with this fact, a generalization of this fact, and show something. So one fundamental theorem of arithmetic states that if you have any number n, it can be actually factored into its prime powers. So for example, if you have n, you can represent that number as some prime p1 raised to some exponent a1 into p2 raised to exponent a2, p3 raised to a3 and so on. So just to give you an example, let's say 60, n is equal to 60. So the prime power, so you factor n into its prime numbers, so that is 2 squared into 5 to the power of 1 into 3 to the power of 1. 5 into 4 is 20, 20 into 3 is 60. So now we can actually find phi of n to be equal to, from this particular rule over here, to be equal to phi of P1 to the power of A1 into phi of P2 to the power of A2 into phi of P3 to the power of A3 and so on. And then using this rule that we have here, we can then say that this to be equal to P1 A1 into P2 A2 into P3 to the A3 into 1 minus 1 by P1 into 1 minus 1 by P2 into 1 minus 1 by P3. However, by definition, n is, so I'm just assuming n has made up of 3 primes, P1, P2, P3 raised to the power of A1, A2, A3 respectively. So this becomes n. So phi of n will be equal to n into 1 minus 1 by P1 into 1 minus 1 by P2 into 1 minus 1 by P3. And this is our phi of n. So let's do this and let us actually compute what is phi of 60. So we wanted to actually compute, we taken n equal to 60 and we know that it's 60 equal to 2 squared into phi to the power of 1 into 3 to the power of 1. So phi of 60 will be equal to n, that is 60 into 1 minus 1 by 2 into 1 minus 1 by 5 into 1 minus 1 by 3, and this is equal to 60 into half into 4 by 5 and into 2 by 3. So you see that this denominator gets cancelled. So this denominator over here, 5 into 2, 10 into 3 is 30. So it leaves 2 over here. So it is 4 into 2, 8 into 2, 16. So phi of 60 is 16. Okay, so I leave this as an exercise. Next thing as an exercise you could do. Prove that for n greater than 2, phi of n is a prime. Is an even number. So this could be done as a homework exercise. Okay, what else? Okay, so another thing which is very important for us is something known as Fermat's little theorem. So what it states that if you have two numbers a and m which are relatively prime to each other, which means that GCD of a comma m is equal to 1, then a to the power of phi of m mod m is congruent to 1. Let us just take an example. Let us take let us just take a to be equal to 5 and m equal to or rather a equal to 3 and m to be equal to 5. Then since phi is a prime, so we know that phi of m is equal to phi minus 1, that is 4. So 3 to the power of 4 mod 5 should be 1. So we can compute it. So this is 3 squared into 3 squared mod 5. So 3 squared is 9. So 9 mod 5 is 4, that's minus 1. So this is congruent to 4 into 4 mod 5, that's congruent to 16 mod 5, and this is congruent to 1. So we can verify it this way. Okay. Now, another important thing which another exercise for you based on this particular theorem is to prove that 72 to the power of 1001 is congruent to rather 0 mod 31, or in other words 31 divides 72 to the power of 1001, right? When 72 to the power of 1001 is divided by 31, there will be no remainder. So you can actually prove it with just the rules that we have studied, exercise 2. And just to give you a hint of how to start with this, use the fact that 72 is congruent to 10 mod 31 because 31 into 2 is 62. 72, when you divide the 72 by 31, it leaves a quotient 2 and a remainder 10. And if you take 10 mod 31 and raise it to the power uh, of 30, that is equal to 5 of 31, then 10 to the power of 30 is congruent to mod 31. So you can take this as a clue, and from here try to actually prove this. Okay. Another thing which is important for us is the multiplicative inverse of an element. Now if we take this element A as before and this element M such that GCD of A comma M is equal to 1, then uh, then there is a unique then there exists a unique element called B such that A into B is congruent to 1 mod M. So B is often referred to as the inverse of A, and is called and is represented and is represented by as A inverse. So typically we say A into A inverse congruent to 1 mod M. So the important thing for us over here is that the GCD of A comma M should be equal to 1. Okay, so how do we find the inverse of an element? So that is typically done by the Euclidean, by something known as find inverse using the extended Euclidean algorithm. Okay, so I will just give you an example of this, the extended Euclidean algorithm. So I'll not dwell into this particular thing, but the fact that we are given two numbers A and B and we have to output the GCD of A comma B. So this is a thing which we would have all studied. So what we do is we take R naught equal to A and R1 equal to B and make M equal to 1, and we keep iterating um, through iterations, and each time we actually divide Rm minus 1 by Rm to get a quotient and a remainder, and eventually when we end up with a remainder which is 0, then the output is Rm minus 1, which is the GCD of A comma B. So for example, let us say that we want 62 comma 45 to be formed. So we are trying to find the GCD of 62 and 45. So you take R naught equal to 62 and R1 equal to 45 and divide 62 divided by 45. So that's a quotient of 1 and a remainder of 17. So 62 could be written as 45 into 1 plus a remainder of 17. So R2 becomes 17 and the quotient for 1 becomes 1. So this 1 comes here and this 17 is the remainder. Now in the next step you take R1, that is 45, and this 17. So 17, you can find the quotient as 2 and a remainder 11 when you divide by 45. So this is 45 equal to 17 into 2 plus 11. So the remainder is 3 when 45 is divided by 17 and a quotient of 2. Now for the third step, you take 17 and represent it by the remainder of 11 into this quotient 1 plus a remainder of 6. So R4 is 6 in this way and you have Q3 equal to 1. And then you take the 11, make it be equal to 6 into some quotient 1 plus a remainder of 5. So that this is a remainder of 5 and the quotient is 1. And then 6 equal to 5 into 1 plus 1. So R6 is 1. And finally, we take we take 1 equal to 1 into 1 plus 0. So you have a remainder of 0 finally. So this is R7, which is 0. And we have to output the last remainder, in which case it is 1. So R6. So our GCD of 62 and 45 is R6, which is equal to 1. So in this way we have computed the GCD of two elements. Now let us next see how to, so there is a proof which we will not go into detail. So we will next see how to actually use an extension of this Euclidean algorithm known as the extended Euclidean algorithm to determine the inverse of a number. Okay, so we have just the same table over here which has just become small, and the fact is that if you just look at these two lines, these two things over here, so you can see that R6, which is the GCD, which is equal to 1, can be actually represented as from this equation as 6 into 1 minus 5 into 1, just from this equation by subtracting 5 into 1 on both sides. Now if we actually take another equation, the previous equation, you can represent 5 as equal to 11 minus 6 into 1. So this 5 gets represented as 11 minus 6 into 1, and this is equal to 2 into 6 minus 11. Now you take the previous equation that you get, that is 6 and 17 equal to 11 into 1 plus 6. So 6 is 17 minus 11 into 1, and you can actually make that substitution here. So you get 2 into 17 minus 11 into 1 minus this 11. So you get 2 into 17 minus 3 into 11. Next you look at this one over here, take the smaller number 11 and you use the fact that 45 minus 17 into 2 equal to 11. So make that substitution over here. So 2 into 17 minus this 3 over here into 45 minus 17 into 2. So that is 3 into 2, 6, 6 plus 2, 8. So 8 into 17 minus 3 into 45. And then you make a similar substitution for the smaller number, that is 17, to get 8 into 62 minus 45 minus 3 into 45. So this will end up with 8 into 62 minus 11 into 45. So let us look from here, how do we actually obtain the multiplicative inverse. So we get this equation 1 is equal to 8 into 62 8 into 62 minus 11 into 45. Now let us take mod 40 mod 62 on both sides. So you get 1 mod 62 is congruent to 1, and 8 into 62, 8 into 62 mod 62 is congruent to 0 because of the 62 term here, and minus 11 into 45 mod 62. So now let us see, 1 is congruent to this 0 goes minus 11 into 45 mod 62. So by our definition, we have identified this minus 11 such that when minus 11 is multiplied by 45 and modulo 62 operation is taken, we get a value of to be congruent to 1. Therefore, the inverse of 45 mod 62 is congruent to minus 11, and this is nothing but 62 minus 11, and which is 51. So we can say that inverse of 60, that if A equal to 45, M equal to 62, then A inverse mod 62 is 51. So there are something, so here, yeah. Okay, so there's just one more thing which is remaining, but I think I have done enough for the day. So I'll stop with this, and in the next class we will actually start with something known as Chinese remainder theorem, which is very important from the RSA perspective. Okay, thank you.